Well, welcome back. Today on History with Dave, we're going to take a look at the miracle of the 1950s. Well, as you see from the slide here, both the miracle and the myth. It seems like every time we get a big election, a presidential election, a gubernatorial election, one or more of the candidates want to stand up and say, let's go back to the 50s where everything was wonderful. And so what I wanted to do today is take a look at the 50s, see what it looked like for real. I'll tell you where I'm going here. The economic miracle of the 1950s is a consequence of the end of World War II, and the idea that mom could stay home and raise the kids and dad could be the sole breadwinner is an anomaly. It's a unique thing in history. And it only happened because of the end of the war. And so let's take a look here. Kai Risdall, the economic radio show and podcast of the show Marketplace, likes to remind his listeners that consumer spending is the economy. 70% of the U.S. economy rises and falls on consumer purchases, things you and I buy. That may be news to some, because a consumer economy is new in terms of gross domestic product. Consumer spending and consumerism is the real topic of today's look at the 1950s. It seems to me, like I said, that politicians and others like to refer to the 50s as the standard, the way life has always been. But in their pronouncements, they declare the loss and in their pronouncements, they declare the loss of the standard and promise things can return to this normal if you'll vote for them. But the 50s, as I said, it was not normal. In fact, it was an anomaly that was a byproduct of what I like to call the Great War Part 1 and Part 2, what all the rest of the world calls World War I and World War II. Here's a few things to look at, to hold as we look back to the golden 50s. First, what I want to point out is that the first child labor law in the United States was passed in 1938. Among other things, like raising the minimum wage for children, the bill limited child labor to 40 hours a week and set the minimum age at 16, except in mining and manufacturing. And if you kind of read between the lines there, you see that they didn't increase, but rather they decreased the number of hours that children worked. Before then, it was really common for children to work 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. And once again, they had an exception for mining and manufacturing. The famous philanthropist and at one point richest person in the world, Andrew Carnegie, when he first emigrated from Scotland, he worked as a bobbin boy, which was a child who scampers around running machines making textiles to make sure that the little bobbins that hold thread can be replaced without turning off the machine. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, 60-hour work weeks were the norm for everyone, including kids. It was common for everyone in the household to work, with some children beginning at kindergarten. My point here is that the idea that dad's being the sole provider of the family was not only new, but it was revolutionary in the post-war decades. Here's a couple of images. So what is the myth? The 50s were golden because dad supported the family while mom was a homemaker. And dad's income allowed the family to buy a house, take an annual vacation, and of course, save for a comfortable retirement. A new car every 3 to 4 years, a house full of new appliances made life easy for mom and the kids, and it gave dad the sense of importance and prominence in the community. Next year, we're going to take a look at some of the economic numbers for the developed world through the 20th century. We're going to start just before the Great War, and we're going to move through from there. And we're going to kind of see if we can figure out what happened here. Was all of this American ingenuity and capitalism? Are there any cause and effect relationships that we can observe? Here's one example of the 50s for us. Look at those big fins on that 57 Chevy Bel Air coupe. And this is also a 57 Studebaker Hawk. And you can see those big fins there, not really have anything to do with the practicality of making the car run. And then on the left side, you see the same era, about a 1956 or 57 Mercedes-Benz 190D. You could look up the horsepower, but it's pretty low. And of course, it's burning diesel. And aesthetically, it's a pretty boring car. Certainly not the kind of car that Mercedes-Benz has become since then. Of course, it's also the time that TV's getting big, and the Beav, right? Here we are with Leave It to Beaver, that just goes on to all of that building up of dad goes to work, mom and the kids stay home. They move to the suburbs, buy a brand new house away from the dirty downtown to their parents, and somebody cue the music. Everybody lives happily ever after. So here's where I'm going today. There are three reasons I want to focus on why the 1950s were golden, and we're going to look at why it didn't last. Number one is after World War II was over, the United States became involved in rebuilding not only Europe, but Japan also. So the rebuilding of all those places that they bombed each other and we bombed had to be rebuilt. And a very important part of that is a United States economic plan called the Marshall Plan. The second we're going to look at is union membership and the effects of union membership. And the last one that we're going to look at is the Cold War and all the Department of Defense spending. I know it says DOD, but it means Department of Defense. And so we will take a look at that. So I want to get started here with a couple of pictures. Why was Reconstruction needed? Here's Berlin in 1945 and Rome in the same year. All the bombing, all the fighting, basically the combatants, except for, of course, the Nazis took over Paris and didn't want it destroyed. They wanted to party in Paris, and so they kept it pristine. But all the bombs, everything, it just completely destroyed most of the main places in Europe. Once again, here's London after the Blitz. And of course, the war in the Pacific was largely a binational war. It was between Japan and the United States. And so nearly all the damage done, especially in Japan itself, is done by the US and the carpet bombing and the incendiary bombs. As a consequence, here's 1945 in New York City and Los Angeles. This is, and you see there's no need to reconstruct. The only significant thing that happened in the country in World War II was Pearl Harbor. So what I've done here is I've provided a link so that you can watch the video that I grabbed some of these stills from. If you'd like to, you can copy it down and then put it in your web browser. So what I've done here is I've taken this little video which shows the gross domestic product and the nominal gross domestic product, which means it's not adjusted for inflation. All of these numbers are real numbers from the dates that this snapshot is from. So this is $31 billion of 1910 money. I didn't bother looking up how much it's worth in 2024 money because it just didn't suit my purposes to have to translate this chart every time. We're going to do a couple of things. We're going to see how things move, and then what I've tried to do is I've taken a pie chart and I've tried to take a selected European countries and match them using the United States gross domestic product as the whole. So we're comparing a pie chart of pieces to one. It works most of the time. You're going to have to give me a little latitude here. And you can see here, 1910, that's before World War I or the Great War started. The United Kingdom, which includes England, Scotland, Wales, India, Hong Kong, other places that the UK was had colonies in. Germany, and then down a little bit further there, you'll see France. And so let's take a look here. So here's a little chart. I simply converted those numbers to percents. And so this is roughly 100%. You can take a look here. The total of Europe is $40 billion and the US is $31 billion. So it doesn't exactly line up, but it's close enough for our purposes here. So you can see here that UK and Germany are almost a dead heat together. They're about 70% of the American economy, equivalency wise. Russia, this is before the Soviet Union, and I've used Russia and I will use it entirely the whole way through so that we don't get confused. What's Russia? What's the Soviet Union? While the politics of Russia changed, essentially it's still Russia the whole time. So that's 1910. Here's 1919. So this is after the war. And you can see what happened after the war is that the United States growth more than doubled. And the United Kingdom went way down. France went way down. And you see the flag there for the Weimar Republic. That's the name of Germany after the war, after the Kaiser's government fell apart and he abdicated. They started a democracy. This is the democracy that Hitler's going to rail against and then use the democracy to get into power. As soon as he's in power, he dismantles it. So Weimar Republic is Germany. And you can see because the war happened mostly, it was a world war, but because the war happened mostly between Germany and France on the border there, the Western Front, you can see there was just a tremendous amount of damage done. And they borrowed a lot of money from the United States to make it work. And so you can see, let's go over here to our pie chart. Our numbers don't work really well. You can see that the total gross domestic product, the total value of goods and services for these countries that I've selected was still only about 3/4 of what the United States was. And remember the numbers in the 30s? You see here, these don't even add up to the whole 100. 27, 16. The interwar period, when they're rebuilding the economy, is very difficult in Europe. There's some other political things going on there, but I just want to focus. I just want to focus on money. So here we are in 1934. Remember, the big thing going on worldwide is the Great Depression. The United States, remember the last number was 77 billion. Here it's 63 billion. So you can kind of get a hint of FDR and the New Deal and all that kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, Hitler did the same thing as FDR did from a governmental standpoint. Is he took government money to put people to work. Now in the United States, the New Deal involved a lot of things. It was the beginning of Social Security. Maybe you're aware of the Works Progress Administration, which built roads and bridges and put artists to work and a whole bunch of other stuff there. What Hitler did is he put people to work like FDR did, but he put people to work building military things. And so you can see two things here. A rebound of the economy. There's the Nazis. Remember, that's Germany, United Kingdom, Soviet Union. Let's go over to our pie chart. Before I do that, I want to put your attention all the way down at Japan. You see how small it is. The United States 63 billion, Japan 4 billion. Japan has picked up the idea of industrialization, and they are becoming an industrialized economy. They're doing pretty well by 1934. Some other day, we'll take a look at the origins of Pearl Harbor and why the Japanese decided that they needed to attack the United States. But I'll just tell you right up front, it's about money and about territory. So here's our chart here, $63 billion in 1934 for the US. And you see the numbers a little off again, 79 billion for all of Europe. And you can see the UK and Germany are basically in a dead heat there. 34, 33%, their economies are coming back. The United Kingdom, you may remember from your high school history class that the United Kingdom doesn't want to fight the Germans again. They have a really bad taste in their mouth from World War I. And so the United Kingdom is purposefully not rearming. So the UK's GDP is not a lot of military stuff, whereas Germany's GDP is a bunch of military stuff. Now here's France. They're in the same spot as the United Kingdom is. They don't really want to fight a war, and they're not building a lot of military equipment. So these are agriculture and other goods and services that happen in Japan, in France. And then you see I've dropped in Japan now. And while I call it Russia in 1934, this is the beginning era of Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union and the command economy. And so the Soviets are telling the country what to produce. So there you go, 25%. Now we're going to move to 1939. If you're one of those people that's into World War II, you might remember that World War II started when the Soviets from the east and the Nazis from the west invaded Poland on September the 1st, 1939. So this is the status of major industrial countries at the very beginning of World War II. And you can see here, just a really quick look, that Germany's economy is roughly half of the United States. So it is really big. And you can also see that the United Kingdom isn't doing anywhere near as well. Now let's go over to our chart here for our percentages. Once again, our numbers are pretty far off because Germany is half of the American economy. One of the things that you can see here is that Germany's economy matches that of the United Kingdom and France put together. And if you follow economics today, you know that the Deutschmark, which is the name of the German currency, the Deutschmark kind of rules the EU. If it goes up, things go well. If it goes down, then the euro, the currency of the EU, goes down. They're kind of, as Reggie Jackson used to say when he played for the Yankees, he said he was the straw that stirred the drink. Well, that's what Germany was and is. 57%. Look at Japan, only 9%, really, really small. And Russia at 26%. For the most part, Russia is not involved in the international economy. This is a lot of trading amongst themselves, but some other day we'll take a look at the Soviet Union. So here we go, 1939. So here's 1945. Now 1945 is similar to 1919, except that the damage is much, much larger. In 1919, if you're an aircraft pilot, there's about a 70% chance the plane you're flying is made out of wood with selected parts of metal and canvas stretched over the wood. That's how the wings are. By World War II, we're dropping hundreds of thousands of tons of bombs. We figured out how to put a fire in a bomb called an incendiary bomb. Tokyo specifically, night after night after night, the Americans are dropping incendiary bombs designed to start a fire in a city where most of the walls are paper, and it just really destroys the place. So this is the end, and all of the other economies have been destroyed by each other. The English bombed the Germans bombed the English, the Soviets bombed the Germans later on after they break their pact that started the war. France is occupied by the Germans, and you know enough about World War II to figure that out. And you can see here, $222 billion American economy, and the next closest is $44 billion. And so there is trouble brewing. Now, one of the things that the United States government, the FDR and Truman administration do, is they're a little worried about the Great Depression coming back after World War II. And those concerns were not unfounded. In fact, the United Kingdom remained on rations for almost another 10 years after the war was over. The United Kingdom's economy did not rebound very quickly. And shortages and unemployment and all that kind of thing kind of stayed. So the people the administration was working with and Congress and all those assorted people and agencies, they had a big conversation and they said to themselves two major things, which is important to us and our look at the 50s. Number one, they were concerned that it was the Treaty of Versailles, the ending of the Treaty of the Great War of World War I. It was the Treaty of Versailles that created the conditions that allowed the fascists to come to power, both in Germany and in Italy. In Germany specifically, the French wanted their pound of flesh, and the Treaty of Versailles not only allowed them to collect ridiculous sums of money from an economy that was in very bad shape. The Treaty of Versailles blamed the Nazis, the Germans, as the sole responsible party for starting World War I, which was an absolute lie and everybody knew it. Not only that, the Germans were not invited to the Treaty of Versailles. And so when the treaty was presented to them, it was an ultimatum. You have to take this. Anyway, so the French at one point during the 20s, they occupied the part of Germany that's their industrial core, so that all the steel and all the industrial stuff, the heavy machinery that the Germans manufactured, the French took over, and they not only ran the business, they took all the profits. And so 1945, the Americans don't want to see the climate return that will be a breeding ground for fascism and communism. And so what they decide to do is they decide that they want to help rebuild the economy of the countries that have been bombed out. It turns out to be a stroke of genius, and we're going to get to the rest of that story in just a moment. Like in World War I, when World War II starts, the United States does two things. They sell food and supplies and material to both sides of the conflict. And they loan, when each of those sides run out of money, they loan each of the sides money to buy the products that come from America. And so when the war is over, just like after World War I, the United States is simply the most powerful country on the planet. Now, here's our numbers, and once again, I've kind of fudged them quite a bit. You see the gross domestic product of the United States is double these countries in Europe, and I've chosen Japan also. And so this is a really big deal. And you can see from the 30s, and Germany was 50% of the economy. You see how things are bad. France is in a really bad spot. And of course, Russia, the same thing. So here is 1950. And in 1950, look at the Soviet Union has started to grow really big. West Germany, after the war is over, there's a partition of Germany. Basically, every place the Soviet soldiers go, when the war is over, they keep that land as a buffer against their concern that the West is going to come and get them. And of course, that's the origin of the Cold War in the first place. Let's take a look at the numbers really quick here. So the numbers are a little closer, but they're still about 2/3. And you can see that that the numbers are really, really low. So what's going on here? The Marshall Plan is going to provide money for each of these countries so that they can purchase materials to retool their economy. And they have to, they've been fighting, so there's no food in the country. It takes about 2 years for the food to come back. And so what the Americans do through the Marshall Plan is they provide money for European countries and Japan. And the only place they can buy things from is the United States. So we give them money to buy machinery so they can rebuild Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz and Jaguar and all these companies that make amazing products eventually. So they use the money to buy the machines to make products that primarily the only people who can afford to buy them are the Americans. So it does two things. It prevents the economy from creating the seeds of another fascist or communist government because hungry people will do anything to eat. And it continues to feed the American economy while those countries are rebuilding. So here we see 10 years later, economies are getting big. Things are going well. The Soviet Union, which controls all the areas behind the Eastern, the Iron Curtain, Romania, Hungary, those places, Poland, East Germany. And so the Soviet economy is largely an insular economy, but they're also repeating what Hitler did, and they're starting to build a lot of military equipment because by 1955, we're right in the middle of the Cold War. This idea that it's either us or them, and so we have to have enough armaments so that we can make sure that we're the last ones standing. Let's take a look at our little economics chart here. Look at France's met up with West Germany. Remember, Germany's a divided country. So we're not talking about the entire German economy because part of the German economy is going to Russia, which also accounts for part of the overall gross domestic product of Russia at 27%. So the Marshall Plan is starting to work. Look at Japan, it's at 6%, and it was only at 8 or 9% in 1939. So things are coming along. Products from those countries are getting better. Now, the next one that I've done here is 1973, and I picked it because it's the good marker for the end of the post-war era. This is, you might remember, in 1973, you were probably sitting in line on odd or even days to buy gas. You might also remember that by 1973, some of the cars that most of us drive today, the Japanese Toyota, Honda, in those days Datsun, the German cars, all of a sudden the Mercedes-Benz is something worth owning. So 1973 is our date for when the effects of the Marshall Plan have taken place and been successful. And so what's happened is these three major centers of industrialization that existed in 1910, Europe, represented by Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and a little bit Italy, Japan, and the United States are the three major areas of industrialization. And by 1973, there are enough quality products that international trade is on par. Now you can see from our little graph here that the United States still has the lion's share of everything, and that remains true. But basically what we can say is that by the end of World War II, all the other industrial economies have ended because they've been bombed and destroyed by war. The United States provides funds via the Marshall Plan to rebuild those economies because hungry people do things they shouldn't do. And by 1973, the Marshall Plan has been successful, and we've returned to this international trading that we had been in. Before the war, remember I called them the Great War Part A and Part B? So we're really back where we were in 1910, 1914. Here's the numbers. Look at Germany's coming way up, just like it did before. Oh my goodness, look at Japan. Marshall funds, the funds that the United States creates to rebuild Japan, are tremendously successful. And then you remember when we were all younger, all the rumors and information and misinformation about the Russians being better than us and having better weapons and all that kind of stuff. And you can see 42%, which is really, really big. So here's kind of the overview. The Marshall Plan was dreamed up by President Truman and General Marshall to prevent another Hitler. They provided monetary assistance to European countries, and they were offered to all countries in Europe, but the Soviet Union decided not to take the money, and they decided the same thing on behalf of the Iron Bloc countries. Just a little reminder there of what that looked like. And so here's kind of what I just walked through. They're going to rebuild their economies. They're going to do it industrially. They needed to be rebuilt. We were the ones that provided it. We were the ones that could buy their products when it was done. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is unionism. Since the days of the robber barons in the late 19th century, there's been this attempt by the workers to get paid a fair living wage. It was, the only way that the Rockefellers and Morgans and Carnegies and all those people, the only way that they got filthy rich was because they paid workers extremely poorly. Working conditions were terrible. If you had your finger cut off because you put it in a moving machine, and that was what was required to work there, and then you could no longer work because you had a missing finger, there was no compensation. There was no workers' compensation. There was no way for you to find another job except maybe you could find something that didn't require you to use your finger. Well, the consequence on the workers' part was to form unions so that they could demand better working conditions, better wages, and better hours. And the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, part of FDR's New Deal, provided for collective bargaining. It was the first major legislation which required businesses to bargain with unions. Before that, as you can imagine, and you probably know just casually, there was some violence during strikes, and sometimes the Guard or the Army was called out. We'll probably do something on early unionism, the Wobblies, and the Socialists on another day. This is what the unions wanted, and to us today, it seems like maybe a little. This is how we consider things to do. You work 8 hours a day, which means 40 hours a week. You get 8 hours to rest, and then you get 8 hours to do whatever you want to do. That was their moniker, their plan early on, and it never really changed. Now this next chart is the red line is the net. Is the income of the top 1% of people. And the blue line is a union membership rate. And what I want you to see is that as unions, which peaked out about 1950, you can see that on the chart there, as unionization gets higher, union membership gets higher, and wages are high, the upper 1%, the amount of those people, the percentage goes down a little bit. Unionization not only benefits union members, but it benefits people who are not union members. You can imagine maybe you have a job and you don't want to deal with the union telling you what to do. You know, unionism's kind of a two-sided coin. And if you just kind of work that through in your head, you can see the two sides of it. And so, if you're the owner of the business and the members want to unionize, if you match the union pay scale and the union benefits, that's all they want in the first place. And so when union membership goes up, all workers get the benefit of that, whether they're in a union or not. So this is kind of a return to what we were talking about. One of this source I have here, Statista, adds to our little list lowering of tariffs. Just really quickly, a tariff is a additional fee you pay for a product from another country. It has two purposes. The first purpose is to encourage you to buy the products made in your own country, and the second purpose is to collect. How do I say this? By adding an extra fee on top of the regular price of that product, the idea is that you'll be more likely to buy the product from America. At the end of the day, and there's been a lot of press about this during this particular presidential cycle, at the end of the day, a tariff is paid by the consumer. So, it's 1973, and you can buy a Rambler or you can buy a Volkswagen Beetle, a Bug. The Volkswagen Bug is $1,000 cheaper. And so the federal government institutes a tariff of $1,000. And now the Volkswagen is $3,000 and the Rambler is $3,000. And you're going to pay the $3,000 as the consumer one way or the other. So it's a tariff is a tax. The government doesn't pay it. The company that's offering the product doesn't pay it. The consumer pays it. The only difference is that it's not a tax like the other taxes that we pay. So here's a chart that shows how productive the American economy was. And what I want to show you about this is it's interesting that, remember, unionism peaked in about 1950? So did the productivity of American workers. You can see from 1940 to 1950, that's during the war and the post-war. Look at it, it just about doubles, which is pretty interesting. In addition to the Marshall Plan, the government, they have all these army people who come back, and they're afraid that if they put them all into the economy at once, it'll crash the economy and cause at the least a recession and possibly another depression. And so the government also decides to institute the GI Bill. The GI Bill is, for the most part, a way to pay for college and to help veterans get into a house. It does more things, but those are the things that we think about. The other thing, of course, is that it provides a gradual return to the economy by providing unemployment insurance. It was widely benefited from. Probably some people in the audience here have done that. It wasn't equitable because it excluded African American veterans who had risked their lives in the war, like Caucasian people did too. So it wasn't equitable, but this is one more of the ways that there's a lot of money in the economy, and so things are looking really good about that. You see here when the lawmakers began drafting the GI Bill in 1944, some of the Southern Democrats didn't want to use that money because they were concerned that it would help end Jim Crow laws. Remember, white and colored parts of the bus, white and colored restrooms, white and colored drinking fountains, white and colored schools. This is what we're talking about here. During the drafting of the law, you see it says here, the chair of the House Veterans Committee, a guy from Mississippi, his name is John Rankin, played hardball like some Congress people do. And he insisted, this is important because there's talk in the public sphere right now about this. He insisted that the federal government didn't take care of the GI Bill, but the states did. And he understood what that meant. What that meant when the states control federal money is the states can determine who's going to get it. And as you can see, he was in favor of Jim Crow. He was a racist. And so what he did is he withdrew in Mississippi. He wanted to make sure that the southern states, which was the bulk of, there's racism all across the country, but it's easy to point to the former Confederacy because Jim Crow laws were, because Jim Crow was a law. It was against the law to provide equal services and facilities for African American people as a consequence of the way that they created their society. We'll talk about Jim Crow, Plessy versus Ferguson, and Brown versus the Board of Education some other time because it's pretty complicated. But what I want you to know is that Rankin used the same words that we're using now. The states should decide, because he wanted to be able to withhold from one part of the society and give it to another part of society. That's what that was about. Now, at the same time that the Marshall Bill is going on, there's this great big Cold War where the Soviets and the Americans are building more and more weapons. You might remember Dr. Strangelove and a mad, mutually assured destruction. And thanks to the Truman Doctrine, we are concerned that if one little country falls to the Soviets, it'll be like dominoes, and all the other countries around it will fall. And so the United States is spending a lot of money on military stuff. You see here at the top of my little chart here, today our military spending represents about 3% of our gross domestic product. Historically, in the 20th century, that's kind of where it's been. But in the 50s, it was 8 to 10%. So part of the economic strength of the 1950s was all the money we were spending building war material, building nuclear and hydrogen weapons, and having a big army to do it, and fighting wars. And of course, the two that we remember really well are Korea and Vietnam. And of course, there we are, just as a little reminder there that it's all about the bomb and making sure that they don't attack us, because if they do, it'll be a chain reaction. I like to, you see over here on the left side, I have Peter Sellers in 3 parts, because Peter Sellers plays 3 different people in the movie. It is a funny, scary movie. Before he did the Pink Panther, by the way. And then you see I have Slim Pickens, probably what made him famous. He loosens the bomb from the B-52, and as he rides it down at the end of the movie, he yells, "Yee-haw!" And his yee-haw is in a juxtaposition to ending the world. And of course, there's the B-52. If you're a fan of the B-52s, you know their song, The Love Shack. President Eisenhower, he came out of the military. This is from his farewell speech, because he was concerned about it. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We've been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. So he was well aware of the power of DoD contractors to get Congress to spend more money on more products that are or are not required and do or don't work. So like I said, 1973 is our marker page here. It's the beginning of the return of globalization, where the pre-World War I industrial centers are rebuilt. Capital and corporations are looking for quality workers and machinery at the lowest cost. Why don't we make a lot of steel here? Because they can make it cheaper in China. Certainly right down the street here where the Fontana Steel Mill used to be, the company, the Fontana, the U.S. Steel Corporation, sold it to the Chinese government essentially, because that's how things work in China. And they disassembled it, put it on a boat, took it over to China, put it back together, and so that's how it goes, because big corporations are always looking for a lower cost. Union wages in the United States are easily replaced by other countries without organized labor. I encourage you, if you have some free time, to go look at what textile workers in Vietnam, India, and Cambodia are making, as opposed to textile workers here in the country, and it'll become pretty obvious to you. And then the other piece, of course, is that back in the day, and you might remember Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, or the Love Canal situation. I mean, the reason the EPA exists is because big business trash the air, they trash the water. We're right down the street over by La Sierra in Riverside of one of the Superfund cleanup sites. The United States came to realize that there was tremendous amount of environmental damage being done by these big corporations. And so they started with the EPA, started by President Nixon. They started to clamp down on things so that if you grew up in Los Angeles, you remember in the 60s when the air was so bad that from Corona you couldn't even see Mount Baldy. I used to refer to it as air you could chew when I was a kid. Things are much, much better now. And so that's all part of the picture too. So what happened? By 1973, we've kind of returned. These other industrial places have fully recovered, and now they're competitors with American products. The Arabs, where all the oil was, the sweet, easy oil, put a big dent in that. You'll remember that. And then as union membership declined, the other companies, remember, union membership also benefits people who were not in the union. So as union membership declined, it's at its lowest place right now than it has been for 100 years. As union membership declined, it led to lower real wages in many industries, primarily, steel and of course the trades and those kind of things, manufacturing. And then of course we were spending 8 to 10% of the total economic output on military things, and now it's at 3%. The result is that we went back to mom and dad working like it had been all the other time. It was in pre-World War I. It was in the interwar period. That's how it was in the 19th century. That's how it was in the centuries before that. If the family had a farm, then mom still did things to make the farm work. That's a great example. John Adams, the second president of the United States, John Adams goes and he does Congress and he goes to France for a while. He does all these things. He can only do that because Abigail, his wife, is running their business, their farm. And so by 1973, we returned to the way it's always been, 2 working adults in the house. So that wraps up what we're doing here. There will not be a History with Dave in December, so our next one's just a couple of weeks away. I want to kind of step us back so we can look at the beginning of the progressive movement. It's all the agencies that, like the Environmental Protection Agency and the National Labor Relations Board, just the whole way that we do ballot propositions in California. This comes out of the progressive movement, and the term progressive has been thrown around a lot in the last couple of presidential elections. So what I want to do is I want to go back and let's take a look at how the progressive movement started, what it means, why did this come about in the first place. I'm going to start this look at with a book by a guy in New York City named Jacob Riis. His book was called How the Other Half Lives, and so that's what I've titled it, How the Other Half Lives. Jacob Riis, Teddy Roosevelt, who's the police commissioner for New York City at this time, and will of course become the United States. The president of the U.S. is involved in this look at how the people who aren't rich are working. So that's what we'll do December the 13th. It'll be right here in